That's a very interesting question because the Edaravone clinical trial is a journey by itself. It started with investigator-initiated trial and then multiple trials that were done, open label phase 2 study, which then ended up with a particular study that unfortunately did not meet statistical efficacy. The numerical number favored Edaravone over placebo, but statistical efficacy was not established. So there was a post hoc analysis done identifying an expected efficacy subpopulation and trying to elucidate if a positive response could be identified in that subpopulation. In fact, this subpopulation got identified and based on certain parameters that were set, which really made the basis for the pivotal trial of Edaravone that led to its approval initially in Japan and then later in Korea and the United States. This is again another good question, and it's a challenging one. But I want to go first about the cohort enrichment that was done. So ALS is a heterogeneous disease, and in order to establish efficacy, those criteria that were set based on the expected efficacy population were that the patient with ALS had to progress over a certain period of time, meaning ALS progression was said to be at less than 2 years. They have to have certain findings on the ALS-FRS rating scale in terms of level of functioning and disability. And for force vital capacity had to be at a certain number. And more importantly, the rate of progression had to be matched between the placebo and the active drug during a 3-month observation period, where it was set between 1 and 4 points of rate of progression on the ALS-FRS rating. Now, the challenges in clinical trial cannot really be equated to real life. In real life, we have the luxury of prescribing it to patients of different level of functioning and severity and onset and degree of progression because you're not bound by clinical trials, inclusion-exclusion criteria, and you don't have a finite amount of time to establish efficacy versus placebo. The main challenge, however, is that Edaravone does not improve the disease, but rather lessen the degree of disability and progression. Again, this would be important that the patient would, he or she, serve as their own control in that regard. This is really the main difference between real life and clinical trial. Well, 10 years is more promising than 5, more promising than 2, but the future looks bright. The Edaravone clinical trial was unique because of cohort enrichment. And had this not been done, probably the pivotal trial would not have been done, and efficacy would not have been established in terms of slowing disease progression, and the drug would not have been approved. So the future holds because, the future looks bright because there are likely more molecules and compounds being identified. The clinical pathway of disease in terms of pathophysiology are becoming more elucidated in terms of genetic breakthrough, gene identification, and there likely will be exponential growth in terms of future trials based on a homogeneous patient population and hopefully with biomarkers to be developed. Now we don't have biomarkers, and this would really be a very bright and hopefully things for the ALS population. This is a remarkable development for the ALS population. For 22 years, there was only one FDA-approved medication for the treatment of ALS. And again, the treatment, that medication has been shown to improve the survival by 2 to 3 months. And during that 22-year period, there were multiple molecules, drugs that were thought to be beneficial based on animal models or earlier phase studies, but then failed later studies. Because of the cohort enrichment that was done in the Edaravone clinical trial, Edaravone got approved. And this is important because Edaravone has been shown to lessen the worsening and the progression in terms of functional and physical disability. So the key here and the challenge from a patient perspective, as well as from a physician perspective, would be to start the medication very early to keep whatever existing function. And thus there will be a new paradigm shift in ALS treatment. You have to treat early to preserve function, or that function that's going to get lost. Anyhow, the slope and rate of progression will be less with Edaravone therapy.